wanna sing a song for you, Lord. Lord, for you I wanna sing a song. I wanna lift my voice to heaven and listen to the angels sing along. A song of your faithfulness, a song of your grace, and of your love and kindness to the glory of your name. With everything that's in me, Lord, listen to me sing. I wanna sing a song for you, I wanna sing a song. I wanna live my life for you, Lord. Lord, for you I wanna live my life. I wanna praise the name of Jesus. Praise above all things you're glorified. A song of your faithfulness, a song of your grace, and of your love and kindness to the glory of your name. With everything that's in me, Lord, listen to me sing. I wanna sing a song for you, I wanna sing a song. I sing about your mercy, I sing about your love, your goodness, Lord, your righteousness. I wanna sing a song of your faithfulness, song of your grace, of your love and kindness to the glory of your name. And everything that's in me, Lord, listen to me sing. I wanna sing a song for you, I wanna sing a song of your faithfulness, a song of your grace, of your love and kindness to the glory of your name. Everything that's in me, Lord, listen to me sing. I wanna sing a song for you, I wanna sing a song. Holy, holy, holy. We sing holy, holy, holy. We shout holy, holy, are you Lord Almighty? We sing holy, holy, holy. We sing holy, holy, holy. We shout holy, holy, are you Lord Almighty? We sing holy, holy, holy. We sing holy, holy, holy. We shout holy, holy, are you Lord Almighty? Let's sing that one more time. We sing holy, holy, holy. We sing holy, holy, holy. We shout holy, holy, are you Lord Almighty?
Jesus, lover of my soul, Jesus, I will never let you go. You've taken me from the miry clay, you've set my feet upon the rock, and now I know I love you, I need you. Though my world may fall, I'll never let you go. My Savior, my closest friend, I will worship you until the
closest friend.
I will worship you until the very end. I love you. I need you. Though my world is gone, I'll never let you go. My sweet, my closest friend. I will worship you until the very end. He became sin who knew no sin, that we might become his righteousness. He humbled himself and carried the cross. Love so amazing, love so amazing. Jesus Messiah, name above all names. Blessed
Will you pray with me? Bow your heads, and let's say back to the Lord the words from Psalm 98. Sing to the Lord a new song, for he has done marvelous things. His right hand and his holy arm have worked salvation for him. The Lord has made his salvation known and revealed his righteousness to the nations. He has remembered his love and his faithfulness to Israel. All the ends of the earth have seen the salvation of God. Shout for joy to the Lord, all the earth. Burst into jubilant song with music. Make music to the Lord with the harp and the sound of singing, with trumpets and the blast of the ram's horn. Shout for joy before the Lord the King. Let the sea resound and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. Let the rivers clap their hands. Let the mountains sing together for joy. Let them sing before the Lord, for he comes to judge the earth. He will judge the world in righteousness and the peoples with equity.
The universe is at your feet, gives you praise evermore. The stars will light the sky for you, and always God be praised. And we sing, the Lord is on high, the Lord is on high. I adore you, I adore you.
Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name, Jesus. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. You give and take away. My heart will choose to say, Lord, blessed be your name. You give and take away. You give and take away. My heart will choose to say, Lord, blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name, Jesus. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name.
Good morning and welcome to Riverwood Church, a place for people who may have given up on
What
faith.
happened to give up on God?
If that's you, you're in a great place and you've made a great decision to join us.
We're not that concerned about where you've
We're
been.
much more concerned about where you're going,
So it's our sincere hope that you'll hear something today in the message
directly from the Bible,
that will tell you just who God is
what His purpose is for you.
and how it can change you forever.
But before we get started, why don't we bring up the house
Find
lights
somebody you don't know.
and welcome them here to Riverwood. Next, I wanted to draw your attention to the program you received when you came in today.
If you didn't get one when you entered, there are sponsors coming down the aisles now with extras.
Just raise your hand and they'll be happy to give you one.
Inside the program is a connection card.
If you haven't done so already, would you begin filling out this card?
If you're a member or regular attender here, you can just give us your name and email address and any information that might have changed.
But if it's your first or second time here with us today, I'd like to ask you to give as much information as you're comfortable sharing.
And be sure to mark the box on the side that says first or second time yes.
As you work your way down the card, you'll see a question that says, how did you first hear about Riverwood?
As a church that values people and relationships, you can probably imagine that we're interested in how you found out about us. So we really appreciate that information.
Now, one of the main reasons we ask you to complete this card each week is because we believe that God has next steps for you.
On the back of your card, you'll find a number of next steps. Check the boxes on your card to sign up for events.
Or to get involved in the various ministries that are happening here at Riverwood.
Also, the flyer in your program has details of each event coming soon to Riverwood.
You'll also find a number of next steps on the card where it says, today the message moved me to.
We'll be sharing more about these in today's message. So hang on to your connection card and we'll collect them at the end of the gathering.
Thanks, and let's continue on.
Okay, it's game day. They're actually having the NFL Combines last week, so there you are. We're right still in the season, early part of the next season. Hey, I don't know about how you think about your life, but I hope that how that perspective has been will be altered by the end of this message. We may be in the last inning of human history. You may be in the last inning of your life. In which case, it behooves us to ask the question, what can we do here to change the game for the end and after the end? What can we do to do that? Have you ever thought of yourself as being a game changer? I think this may be a good time for you to listen up. Now, inside your program, you'll find this, which just looks like the program cover, but it's actually the notes for the day. You'll notice that they're rather full because I included a somewhat lengthy passage, and I'll explain how that goes in a little bit. But right inside of that front cover, there is the theme verse, which is the memory verse for this series. that we're in called Imagine, the life you always dreamed of. And so I want you to just make a commitment, like check your card, say, I'm going to memorize this thing. It's like one sentence, and you've got 4 weeks. See if you can memorize one sentence in 4 weeks. Now, you don't have to remember telephone numbers anymore. You don't have to remember channels anymore. You don't have to remember any of that stuff. But this is one thing that could change the way your life works. And you notice in this, there's a word called imagine. When we get to that word, a little bit of imagine enthusiasm. To overpronounce that, shout it out. All right? We're going to begin reading the verses with the words, "Now to him who is able to do." Ready to go? Ready? Ready? Go. Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, to him. Okay, let's start again. I mean, I love the imagine thing. I think 3 of us really did that well, and the rest of us said, "Oh, there it is." And then we're so surprised that we've got, oh, what comes after that? All right, let's do it again. There we go. Go. Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us, to him be glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever. Now, again, on this connection card, on the back side, there is a box to check that you're going to make a commitment to memorize that. I would highly recommend it. I've done it, and it is a game changer. It really is one of those thoughts in life that can change everything on the outcome. So I make the assumption that the life that God said could be lived was possible to be lived. The thing that he wanted for his children is possible. Oftentimes we look at it as something that just could never happen to me. So he said the outcome of God's life in any human life was an extraordinary one, like overflowing with, here they go, love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and gentleness and faithfulness and self-control, which is the missing section. I just thought I'd point that out. It was full at 9. I don't know what's going on. So anyway, so this is the series. This is life we want, right? We want it because God made us to want it. He actually designed life to be lived like this. But it's difficult for most people to do. As a matter of fact, most people think it's like impossible. And they make a good point. On our own, it is. So this series is about a life way above average. It is a life that God wants for us, but it's a life that very few people actually experience. Each week, we'll explain to you what you have to do to get it, what prevents it from happening. We were there a couple of weeks ago, and last week we were talking about the thing that empowers it, and this week we're going to talk about the major motivation for the whole thing, for it to be successful. So we're going to try to give you the plan and the support in the groups that you're in. Hope you're in a growth group. I hope you're taking this seriously and developing some skills and then some habits that can be a life-changing thing. Now, just when you may have thought that your life didn't matter much to anybody anymore or anyone, I came with an illustration. I received this straight from a bank. So note what this is. This actually is a note, right? Anybody recognize a $10 bill, a 10 spot? Ready? Anybody want this? I mean, I'm going to give it to somebody. Anybody? I'm going to give it to somebody. I'm going to give it away to somebody. Anybody want it? Okay. Some of you are such skeptics, right? I'm literally going to give it to somebody this week. I'm going to give it away. And it's a 10 spot. Now, the question is, after this, see, it's not only the government that can do this. No, that wasn't the political speech. Okay, now who wants it? Anybody? What? Okay. Anybody want it now? Why? It's no good. Actually, you know better than that, right? Because the value of this thing isn't the paper and the ink that's printed on it. It's something that stands behind it and gives it a value that really doesn't exist otherwise. I want you to understand something about your life and to ask the question, what is my value in the world? Because some of you feel like this. Is that true? Is the thing that you feel about yourself true? Or what does God think about you, on the other hand? Because what you think God thinks about you is far more important than what you think about you, because he has the truth and you may not. What's your value? A couple of years ago, I read a magazine article that suggested that the entire value of the chemical elements of the human body was $2.69. That's inspirational, isn't it? With inflation, let's say a decade later, okay, maybe you're worth $5. That's exciting, isn't it? And then some people say, well, with all that computer and all that stuff going on upstairs, well, it could be hundreds of thousands. Could be. What is your value? Is it the accumulation of your bank accounts and whatever car you might drive, and that might be bleak, or not? It could be your work, could be your savings, could be your toys, could be your children, your house. What are you actually worth? The answer to that question sculpts the rest of your life. Your value is in direct proportion to how much you are loved. Now, I want to get clarity on this. If you get nothing else out of this, this is what I want you to get. We have infinite value because we are loved with an infinite love. We have infinite value because we are loved with an infinite love. So this week I want you to understand this. You matter to God, and so does your friend, so does your family, so do the other people outside of this group. Your life really can change another life. It really can. So here's the question. When I die, will anyone know I have lived? Now listen, you only get one go around here. You don't get multiple tries. The Bible says it's appointed to a person once to die, then the judgment. You don't get a second option. Not in this world anyway. You don't get a second chance. This is the only life you've got to live. Is it something that's like ordinary, just oozing along day by day, or something really extraordinary? Do you think of yourself as a game changer in the world, or is it something like you just know that life's just passed me by, you know? It's just going on day by day. I never really think about that very much. Is it significance that you're getting out of life, or just kind of silliness? Since this is the only life we have to live on the planet, let's learn how to make something magnificent out of it instead of something just like mediocre. Instead of mediocre stuff, let's learn how to be a game changer. And literally, you can be. In sportscasting, for many years, they had something they called the Michael Jordan camera. Now, if you know anything about basketball, or even if you don't, you know that Michael Jordan played, and at least he has some really nice shoes. One of those two is true for you, and probably both. Michael Jordan was the game changer. And they had at the end of games that were on the line what they called a Michael Jordan camera. Because they knew that if a game was on the line in the last 2 to 3 minutes, Michael Jordan was going to make a play or do something that would change the outcome of that game. So they kept a camera focused on him, and that's all it did, is follow him around the floor. So if you wonder how they got all those great cutaways of Michael Jordan, that's how they did it. Because there was just one camera following him for the last 2 to 3 minutes of a game. Let's suppose that this is the last 2 or 3 minutes of the game of the universe, or maybe your life. Let's just suppose that that was true. There was a man who said, rather nostalgically perhaps, that he thought of himself like the professor on Gilligan's Island. And you know, it's not been a good week for illustrations when I go all the way down to the depths of Gilligan's Island to pull up a story, because I hated that show. Anybody like Gilligan's Island? I couldn't stand to watch it. I thought, these idiots. But that's just me. Like, for example, this guy found time to fashion generators out of palm fronds, you know, the professor, right? And he could make vaccines out of algae, right? But he never got around to fixing the hole in the boat. What's with that, you know? But fixing the hole is dependent on getting your value structure straight. The thing was filled with so much crazy, stupid, silly humor. But the point of the thing was odd, wasn't it? They're stuck on an island, and they can't get the boat to work. There's something really weird about that. But your view of your life and what you're going to do and where you're going to go next are directly dependent upon the values that you hold in regards to you and other people in the world. It's dependent on the view of God you have and how you think He sees you. So here's a phrase for you. Try this one on for size. What do you think God thinks when God thinks about you? What do you think God thinks when God thinks about you? Your answer to that question changes the course of your life. And that's what this is about today. G.K. Chesterton said it this way: people matter. All people matter. You matter. I matter. It's the hardest thing in theology to believe. I think that's true. We can hear it, and we don't believe it. But it is dangerous to wander away from this value. If you think you're worth little, if anything, you'll be crippled in your relationships. You either think you're good enough for anyone, not good enough for anybody to consider, or way too good for anybody to consider. One of those two things could be true. No one could be quite on your level. If your view is different like this, your view of what you can do in this world is like preset on low. Many people live like this. Their expectation of themselves is preset on low because that's how they think of themselves. Your career and job expectations can be dampened if that's how you think of yourself. Even though you may have gifts, abilities, talents, and intelligence, all of these things may go completely wasted or underserved if you don't believe you have value in the world. If you don't believe the way God believes about you. And you will tend to see other people as you perceive yourself. You kind of project this idea onto others. Your view of yourself sets the template for others. Well, I'm not worth much. You're not worth much. No one is worth much. It kind of lets us off the hook to think of anything good about anybody else. Even death, in the end, yours or somebody else's, doesn't matter much if your life doesn't count for much, right? You end up with a high view of death and a low view of life. It's a dangerous place to live. But if my life doesn't matter, neither does my death. That is a precarious place to live. That's why today's message is so important to your future and the mark you make in this world. All right? Jesus was motivated by this misinformation, by this phony idea, this bad idea. And that was this: a holy God cannot possibly love a moral failure. A holy God cannot love a moral failure. A holy God cannot love a moral failure. I want to set the stage for the scripture passage. It's sort of like this thing about Jesus. Wherever he went, people would gather around him. But it wasn't all the religious people here to hear about him. They were there to criticize him. What he was really there to do was just talk to people. And there was often people who were moral failures, people who were the dregs of society, the sinners and the tax collectors. I don't know why I know why they get always. They were the lowest of the low in Jewish society. And for that, he was constantly being criticized by the religious elite. You'll find this in Luke chapter 15. Actually, it's the entire chapter, which is why your notes are kind of filled with words, because the entire chapter almost is there. I had to cut out a few things because I couldn't get it all in. Page 1047, if you want a Bible, somebody come down the line. You can read the whole thing right in the context if you want to. So, in this particular teaching, Jesus was so motivated and animated by the reaction to this thought and the people who held it, that he stacked three stories, three parables together to get a point across that could not be missed. He didn't want anybody around who heard the story to miss the point. So what is a parable after all? We hear the word all the time. Well, it's a fiction, actually. These aren't true stories, true people. He creates a story to make a point. It's something that brings feeling and emotion to a fact he's trying to get across. It's a story told to illustrate a principle and impact people. It sneaks up on them from behind and catches them by surprise. So Jesus illustrated his concern for people, that they matter to God, with three stories. We know them as the parable of the lost sheep, the parable of the lost coin, and the parable of the lost son. Those stories all have a common theme, and the theme is people matter to a loving God. And all three illustrations have three common threads. Every one of them has the threads in it. Something that matters greatly is missing. Because it mattered greatly, it occasioned a great search. And after the great search was consummated, there was great rejoicing in the finding. Something of great value is missing. It occasioned a great search, and then there was a great party at the end. All right? That's the setup. There's this common thread. The major takeaway for each of us is God is speaking to you and me, and he is saying, something matters to me. Don't miss it. The first thread, something that matters, is missing. You'll find this in chapter 15, starting at verse 3. Then Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Does he not leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? 100 sheep, one is missing. Doesn't sound like much, but this is the guy's livelihood, right? He is missing. As a matter of fact, it matters so much to him that he leaves 99 at risk and leaves them and goes to find the one that wandered off. I don't know if you feel like that sometimes. Do you matter among 100 that you wandered? Does he look for you then? And Jesus is saying, yes, indeed, he does. One time, years ago now, Colleen lost a ring. Now, that's not unusual if you know Colleen. I like to give her jewelry, and it's a good thing because she likes to receive it, and that's why I like to give it. I guess that all made sense. Let me think back on. Yeah, I guess that made sense. But she also tends to lose them, which means the fact that I can always give her another one. It's a good thing for me. Really, I came to realize this is a benefit, because now I don't have to think about what I'm going to get her next, because it's always got to be a ring, because she just lost the last. No, that's not true, but it's a little exaggerated. But anyway, she likes these things, and so I like giving them for her. So, but one day, she had received something that I hadn't given her. It's a one of a kind. It was a ring that belonged to her mother and her grandmother. It was made from platinum, very rare in those days. And at one time it had a diamond stone, like a 2-carat diamond in it, which had recently or subsequently been replaced by some kind of gemstone. It's still very valuable. And then it was missing. You know how bad it is and how much it counts if you start turning the entire house upside down. Not a drawer remained unopened. Not a single place. We looked in the dishwasher. We looked in the, well, all kinds of places we looked. We won't go into a lot of detail, but every single place it might possibly have been. We searched out the car. I vacuumed everything. And then checked out the vacuum bag, right? It was that big a deal. And you know, it's really bad when at the end you go out and empty out all the garbage bags and sort through all the garbage to find the one thing that was lost. Now, if you're thinking, now, no ring is worth that, that's exactly what I was thinking. But it was important, so we looked. What was missing here mattered to someone. That's the point he is making. Now, listen, God does not love us because we are valuable. We are valuable because God loves us, and we matter that much. We are valuable because of that. He carries your picture in his wallet, if you will. On February 24th, 2001, a 1-year-old Canadian girl named Erica somehow got out of her mom's bed, found a way to open the front door of the house in Edmonton, Canada in the middle of winter, and wandered out into the cold. She wasn't found to be missing until the next morning. And all night long she'd been in the Canadian cold. Of course, there was a frantic search. They called emergency people then, and scores of people were scanning the area looking for her, which they did find her. Frozen. Lifeless. And they brought her back to Edmonton Health Center, and God helped doctors and rescue workers to bring her back to life. It was like a miracle. To the amazement of all, there appeared to be no sign of brain damage, and the doctors said Erica had a clear prognosis. She'd one day be up and talking and skipping and running like other little children do. But can you imagine the desperate search? Have you ever lost a child even for a moment in the middle of Walmart? Right? They wander under a rack of clothing. They go around a corner. You can't see them, and suddenly you're going, "Where are you?" And then you get them and you say, "Don't you ever wander off from me like that again." Right? That is what he is saying God does for those who wander off. It pales in comparison, actually, to what God does to find us. And when God finds us lost and helpless and frozen, he brings us back to life. People who are missing matter to God. The 4th grade class teacher was in the hospital. She received a card from her students, branded, of course, with jelly and peanut butter stains with little hands, and everybody had signed it. And inside of it, somebody had scrawled the message, "The 4th grade class at Twinbrook Elementary School wishes you a speedy recovery," by a vote of 15 to 13. When God is all in on this search, it is not a second thought for him. It is not something that he had as an afterthought. You are the centerpiece of his search. And because of the fact that he is the almighty, infinite God, he is not overwhelmed by the fact that there are 6 billion in his crosshairs. He knows who you are. The first thread, something that matters greatly, is missing. Here's a takeaway. You matter. All people matter. You matter. All people matter. Your friends matter. Your family matters. People matter to God. The second thread is this. Its value motivated a search. Now, both of these stories so far, the sheep and then the coin, have the same kind of a thing going on. Suppose a woman, he says in verse 8, has 10 silver coins and loses one. Does she not light a lamp, sweep the house, search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I have found my lost coin." Same three elements, right? Something of value is missing. Now, what made this so important? I mean, it's just a coin, and it was probably something but she was desperate to find it. Why? Because it wasn't just a coin. It represented her life. See, in those days, a typical dowry for somebody who was marriageable in age would be displayed. Oddly enough, we think of this as sort of funny, but in those days it was important because they wanted to know they were available for marriage, and the 10-coin dowry was the signal. That was oftentimes woven into a headband and worn out in public, so people would know that this is a person who was eligible to be married. She didn't lose a coin, she lost her future in this. It was partly a coin, but partly something bigger than that, because it was something she was given to secure her life. If God had not sought us, listen, if God had not sought us, none of us would be found. If he had not gone out of his way to find us, none of us would be found. On March 10, 1974, Lieutenant Hiro Onada was the last World War II Japanese soldier to surrender in 1974. The war was over in 1945, almost 30 years later. Onada had been left on the island of Lubang in the Philippines together with 4 other guys to carry on the mission, even if Japan surrenders, was the command given, and obviously he took it really seriously. 4 other Japanese soldiers were left with him. They were evacuated, everybody else left, and they said, "You guys carry on." It was on Christmas Day, 1944, December 25th. I guess Merry Christmas doesn't mean much if you're a Buddhist emperor worshiper. 4 other prisoners or soldiers were left with him. 1 soldier was surrendered in 1950. He just came out and said, I'm done, 5 years later. Another was killed in a skirmish with local police in 1954, some 9 years later. Another was killed in 1972. Onada continued his private war alone for over 29 years. He was 22 years old when left on the island. He returned a prematurely aged man of 52. Now listen, during this time, his commanding officer, whom he recognized, was sent out with broadcast speakers. They tried everywhere, said, "The war is over. I'm commanding you to come in." And he would not fold no matter what. You almost have to admire the tenacity. But in this process, 13,000 men were used to try to locate him. During this time, he probably killed somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 of the nationals around the area, just trying to protect himself and stay hidden. He pilfered and stole, and that's how he stayed alive. Here's what he said of the 29 years in the jungle. Nothing pleasant happened in the 29 years in the jungle. Nothing pleasant. That seems a lot to me like what happens with people for whom God is searching. They live this highly unpleasant life to which they are completely committed, because in order to go out of it, they have to surrender. To leave it, they have to surrender. And that is something they just cannot find themselves the way to do. God is searching, he is calling, he is coaxing, and yet they refuse. Jesus had a simple mission in this world. It really was simple. He came, and it says it very clearly, to seek and to save the lost. Jesus came to seek and to save the lost. That's all he did. His entire life, especially in the 3.5 years or so of outside ministry, that entire life was dedicated to one exclusive purpose. Just one exclusive purpose. And then he said, "I'm going away, you take over." Here's the amazing thing to me after all these years of watching people. How few have brought anybody else into the family of Jesus during the life that they've lived with Jesus. How can this possibly be? Well, we have a solution to that. If you have noticed the flyer inside, and if you've noticed on your card, there is a box to check about this. And all you have to do is make an invitation. If you're in a growth group this next week, it's Servant Evangelism Week, and everybody's going to we're going to have fun and go out and distribute posters and flyers and so forth, and businesses around the communities that you meet in, and then probably go have something really. I'm thinking ice cream afterwards for my group. That's just so you know, but. But anyway, last year we did this. We had like 100+ people out distributing flyers and everything, and we had a record attendance of 420 at Easter. That's 6 weeks away, 6 weeks from today, right? So we have a goal now. Maybe we can like double that. That'd be fun, wouldn't it? How about what would it be like if we had like 600 or 700 people here on Easter Sunday? You know the reason why we wouldn't? Because we just didn't do our job. Because people are looking. People are wanting to find out, and we stand between them and the seeking God who thought they mattered so much that he gave Jesus for them. The first takeaway, you matter, all people matter to God, that is the first thread about something great value of missing. The second thread is this, your value, the value of people motivates a great search. And the third takeaway is, for the second takeaway for the second point is this. If you're a pre-Christian, somebody who hasn't really considered stepping over the line yet, listen, God is mobilizing an all-out search for you. It's not like this is an accidental kind of a thing. So I want you to sort of recognize the signs, identify it when it's happening, because I didn't see it till after it was done, not maybe for a couple of years later. I started to have questions about purpose and meaning. I had to have questions about myself, about what I was here to do. I started to have problems in my life that made me wonder what in the world life was all about anyway. And those things were part of the search that God made for me. I thought of it as my search for him. He thought of it as his search for me. Then I started to have trials and things that I couldn't handle, right? They were well beyond me. And then people started to come into my life to talk to me about this and invited me to a church, and I thought, this is weird. Right? But those were all parts of it. They were all messages that I mattered, and somehow I missed it until I got it. And suddenly it all became clear. But if you're a follower of Jesus, here's the simple idea. Do what he did. Seek the lost. We are debtors in this world, aren't we? So the question is this, whom have you loved enough to bring? On July 4th, 1854, Charlie Peace was a well-known criminal in London, and he was hanged for his crimes. The Anglican Church, who seemed to have a ceremony for everything, even had a ceremony for hanging. That's when you know you've probably done a little bit too thinking about something. So when Charlie Peace was marched to the gallows, a priest read these words from the prayer book. It goes like this. Those who die without Christ experience hell, which is the pain of forever dying without the release which death itself can bring. When these chilling words were read, Charlie Peace stopped in his tracks, turned to face the priest, and he said, do you believe that? Do you believe that? And the priest was a little surprised that somebody would say something like that, and he stammered for a moment, then he said, well, I suppose I do. And Charlie Peace said this, well, I don't, but if I did, I'd get down on my hands and knees and crawl all over Great Britain, even if it were paved with pieces of broken glass, if I could rescue one person from what you just told me. Now, I'm constantly amazed at how few followers of Jesus have ever led another person to faith in Christ. Followers of Jesus do what Jesus did. Followers of Jesus do what Jesus did. Bring someone to church. Easter is coming. Take advantage of it. Everyone, even if you're not in a growth group, you can still do this. You have the flyers in the program. Give it to somebody who you think could benefit from it. 80% of the people in our area do not go to church, but the 2 times of the year they think about it are Christmas and Easter. Take advantage of it. Invite 5 people to Easter. Think about it. Invest in it. Pray for them. Invite them. 5 people. If everybody in the church did that, we would have 1,500 people in church on Easter. That would be a fun problem to negotiate. First takeaway, you matter to God. You are something of great value, as is every other human being on the face of the planet. The second one is the value motivated a great search on the part of God, and then the finding results in a great rejoicing. The intensity with every one of these stories rises with each one because the proportions rise. There was a shepherd who had 100 sheep. One of them wandered off. There were 10 coins that a woman had, and one was dropped, and she lost it. Then the highest stakes and the highest level of intensity, there was a man who had 2 sons, and one of them ran off. 100 sheep to 1. That mattered enough for an all-out search and a great party at the end. There was 10 to 1. It mattered enough to have an all-out search and a great party at the end. Then there was a man with just 2 sons. One of them showed up missing. The highest stakes, the highest level of intensity. The prodigal punk. Let's call him PP. Jesus sets up his hearers to despise this jerk. Really. He set it up to have them despise the punk. This is a guy, this is an honored son of a principled man. And suddenly, having everything he could want, he wanted more. He committed 3 unforgivable, dishonorable things that changed himself and his family in this story. The first one is he demanded his inheritance when it was not his time or place to do. Here's what he said in verse 12. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between the 2 sons. Now, typically in the inheritance, this doesn't matter a heck of a lot, but just so you know, the older son would get 2/3 of the estate, the younger would get 1/3 of the estate. However, in this particular case, this is a wealthy guy, and he had plenty to give, and the younger son shamefully demanded it. Secondly, he took what he had not earned and wasted it selfishly on himself. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. Now you're really thinking, what a jerk. What a jerk. He took what didn't belong to him, and he wasted it as if he owned it himself, as if it was his to do. And the third one is he lost everything, fell to the low state of working for a Gentile in a foreign country in the lowest state possible, feeding pigs. Now, in a lot of places in this country, feeding hogs is an honorable way to live. But in those days and in that culture, it was the worst possible thing you could do. Touching a pig was to make yourself unclean spiritually speaking. That's how bad it was in their culture. So he set this prodigal punk up to look like the worst of the worst of the worst. He had gone from this height of great honor and esteem to this lowest place where they could just despise him. The sinners hear it, on the other hand, and they say, well, that's me. That's what I've done. And I deserve what's coming to me. The religious elites are thinking, that's them all right, and they deserve everything coming to them. And Jesus obliges them in the story. Here it comes. Now listen, there are 2 audiences that he's talking to here. He's a master teacher. He's talking to both. They both have a lesson in it. The 2 audiences are these. You find them at the top of the story. The first verse in the chapter. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. Wherever Jesus went, these folks found him and liked to be with him. I don't know if that's true for you, but with these folks, those who were far away from God enjoyed being with Jesus. And not only that, Jesus enjoyed being with them. Jesus enjoyed being with them, those far away from God. And this is something that the religious elite could not understand. The Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. He said, welcome sinners. You see that? Look at what he's doing. And so they're around the fringe of the crowd here that have come to hear Jesus. One group of people came to hear Jesus and the hope he was giving. The other group came to evaluate and judge him. Now think about that just for a moment. They are muttering and criticizing, not now just the moral failures, but the one who wants to be a friend of a moral failure. The rabbi, the teacher, the righteous one could not possibly be consistent with going to meet and talk with these guys. See how the setup is? So you have these 2 groups of people. One of them thinks, wow, he cannot be a righteous guy and be with them. and talk with them. They're talking around the fringes of that. They wouldn't be close to Jesus. They're there to check him out and to evaluate him. Think about this. The one who came to seek and save the lost, the Son of God himself, was being judged and evaluated by the religious elites who thought they were too righteous for him. This is the status of virtually every religious community on the face of the planet, most especially the Christian community. As soon as we start to think they don't belong here because we're too good for them, and it's subtle stuff. So there are three figures in the story, and that's how it plays out. The three figures that Jesus sets up in each one of these is that, in this one particularly, the father represents God, of course, He's the one who was waiting and looking. The younger prodigal, the tax collectors and the sinners. Everybody gets that. The prodigal punk. Well, no, everybody knows who he's talking about there. But the other figure in the story, which actually the point of the whole thing, was the older brother, and that's the part we typically miss. We call this story the story of the prodigal son. Actually, it was the older son who was the focus of the story. The other ones were the auxiliary players. The sinners are listening to this thing and they're saying, that's me, that's what I've done, and I deserve what's coming. And the religious elites are thinking, that's them all right, and they deserve everything they're getting. Everything coming to them. And Jesus obliges them in the story. Here it comes, verse 14. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country. That's a low place to be if you're a good Jewish guy. Who sent him to his fields to feed pigs, worst of the worst. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating. He's getting nothing for this virtually, but no one gave him anything. There was no generosity. There was nothing out of his life. No grace, no love, no mercy, and the religious elites are cheering approval. Yeah, he got what was coming to him. In the culture of the first century, as it still is today in ancient cultures, we see stories and hear about these even today. There was no greater sin than that of dishonoring your father and your family. No greater sin. It was a capital crime in some cultures, still exists today. He knew he had no standing as a son, this prodigal punk, Pee-Pee. But he could still beg to be accepted as a servant, right? He knew he could still maybe do that. So after all the shameful waste, Punk realizes that what he once had, knowing that the servants in his father's household were a whole lot better off than where he was, broke and starving, maybe I could negotiate a new deal with my dad. So verse 17 is where we pick this up. When he came to his senses, right? He said, oh, this is really, really bad. It can't get any worse. He said, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? So he makes a careful calculation in this whole thing. I will set out and go back to my father, right? He's going to return. Then he starts rehearsing his speech. Now, I don't know if you've ever done this before, but I've had to do it a few times in my life. And say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. So he got up and went to his father. Walking along the road, can you imagine him rehearsing the speech? Father, I've sinned against heaven. That's not quite right. I've sinned against heaven and against you. Yeah, that's better. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. He'll get that part. So he's just walking along. This is what's called the long walk home. I've had a few days like that when I was growing up. One time late at night, pulled over a snowbank and caught a post and wrinkled up the wheel well of my dad's car. That was a long night. One time I managed to, when I was a little kid, I found my mother's watch, and it was really pretty, and it was a dress watch, and she didn't have many things like that. And I managed to break the crystal on it. She was brokenhearted, and I had to kind of explain. I just wanted to play, right? It's a long time to figure out how you're going to get back. You ever had that? You ever, managed to throw a baseball through a window? Not that I ever did that. But, yeah, where you have to explain yourself. If you ever had a moment like that with somebody that you misused their stuff or hurt them, then you know what this guy was feeling. Now the story takes a twist. For both listeners, the sinner and the saint, there is a surprise waiting. Verse 20 is where you find it. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him. As long as the walk home was, so long had the father been waiting to see his boy again. There the punk was, dragging his body along, stinking of pig, shoulders hunched in weariness, head bowed in shame, just shuffling up a long dusty road towards the house that his father owned, and he used to own too. And his father saw him and was filled, not with shame, which all the religious people were thinking he ought to have been, not with anger and rage, which he certainly deserved, not with embarrassment, but he was filled with compassion for him. He ran to him, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The punk breaks into his rehearsed speech. He goes like this. The son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." And the sinners are thinking, "That's right. That's me. That's how I feel. That's the way I am." And the saints are thinking, "That's right. The rotten punk. It's about time he got what humility made his father feel. He got what coming to him. And now his dad can just bomb him, right? Now he's completely at his mercy," which is where he should be. Then came the hook. The surprise to both parties. The father said to his servants, "Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger, sandals on his feet." His status as a son is restored with these three acts. Because servants wore no sandals typically in the house, only the people who could afford them. And the robe was an indication of the fact that he was covered, where he was both ugly and smelly before. And the most important one of all was the ring, which was the signet ring of the family. He was restored in place as well. And then he says, "Bring the fattened calf and kill it." There's only one reason why those calves existed. That was to have a party. And it was being prepared for just that. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. Something of great value was missing. It occasioned a great search. He was watching for him all the time. And after he was found, there was a great party. There's the first surprise. No probation for the punk. No probation time. The second surprise is even bigger than that. No grace from the righteous. The older brother. Here's the third character representing that other group, right? The older brother, the point of this whole parable, the older brother hears the party going on, makes inquiry about the reason, and he finds out that it's his younger brother, the prodigal punk, the jerk who ran off and took 1/3 of the estate with him, and he explodes in rage. He became angry and refused to go in, so his father went out and pleaded with him. He pleaded with him, but he answered his father. Now listen for the shameful, humiliating way that he treats his own father. Different than his younger punk prodigal brother, but the same. He dumps on his father for it, for giving him grace to his brother. Here's what he says. There's no way to say this with the kind of disdain that's in his voice. "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders." This is the way people bound up in a religious community often feel. I'm just bearing all this burden and doing these things and this grudging obedience and grinding lifestyle that I live. It's all for you. I did this for you. You should appreciate me. I should be great value because of all the things I do. And he says, yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. You never did that for me. I do this all for you. What do I get from you? I get nothing but hard work and obedience and grudging servitude. That's what I get. You treat me like a servant, you treat him like a son. What's with that? Now think about this. In the story, Jesus is setting up how religious people feel about God, the Father. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him. The jerk. What's he worth? Here's what he is saying, in essence. Listen, Dad, you may think he's still your son, but he's not my brother. And his father disagrees with him once again. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. I know that feeling. There was a young man many years ago now who was smart enough, had friends, and kind of knew what he wanted to do. But the defining characteristic of his life was he had no idea what he was here for. He was lost. There was no purpose. no real meaning. There wasn't much peace in the quiet moments of life when there should have been. And in the end, he had no idea who he was and what he was supposed to be. I had no idea God was looking for me then. I only knew how I felt when I was there. But then I became a believer, a follower of Jesus, and I received him, and he became my father. What I didn't know at the time was how big a deal that was, not just for me, but for God. They held a party in my honor in heaven, I suppose you could say, and they strung a banner across the gate of heaven, and it had my name on it. I never deserved that, but I appreciate it even to this day. During the Korean War, a South Korean Christian civilian was arrested by the communists and ordered to be shot. But when the young communist leader learned that the prisoner was in charge of an orphanage taking care of young children, he decided not to kill him, but to kill his son instead. So he took his 19-year-old boy, stood him in front of the father, and while he watched, shot him in the head. Killed him on the spot. Later, the fortunes of war changed, and this young communist leader who led the execution party was brought to court, and he was sentenced to death. But the father of the young man he had executed came to court and pled his case, saying this: he was young. He didn't know what he was doing. Give him to me, and I will train him. I felt like that. I did. And maybe you have too, if you came to realize just how far you'd come to a holy God and how far away you had lived your life. And I thought to myself, I must really matter to God. If he did that for me, how much could I matter to him? That's the first thread. You matter to God, and others do too. You are of great value to him. And because you've been missing, that value motivated him for a great search, and he's been on that search, whether you're on this side of it or the other. And then finally, when you are found, there is great rejoicing in heaven over what's just happened. So here's the takeaway. If you've not yet stepped over the line and come to faith, get found today. Run home to the Father. He's waiting. I mean, it's not like a battle that he wants to lose. He wants to get you. If you're a post-Christian, listen. The real point of all of these stories was not the thing that was lost. It was the attitude of the people toward the things that were lost. The righteous people. And all the while, Jesus is saying, I have a single mission in this world, to seek and to save the lost. Go and do that. To seek and to save the lost. 7 words defining his whole life, his whole journey, his whole mission, and his death and resurrection was all about that. And he never wandered from that purpose at all. So why does the church so often wander? Maybe it's because we've forgotten how much it mattered to him. Now, if you're a follower, when Jesus says, I have come to seek and save the lost, why can't you just say, well, that's my purpose too? I mean, you may have other purposes in this life that are subsidiary to that, but if that was the number one agenda of Jesus and you're his follower, then why aren't you involved in that? So I want you to take out your connection card. Check a box. Bring somebody. Pray about 5 people. Put their names down. Try to think about that. Invest in them. Invite them. The lives of people depend upon it. And I'm going to have a drawing from all the connection cards that get turned in, and somebody is going to get the $10. I might even pull it out and press it. No, I won't, but you'll get it, just as wrinkled as it is now. Here's the thing I want you to get. I want you to ask the question first, am I lost? Or do I know somebody who is lost? Maybe like a sheep, they've wandered off. There are a lot of people like this who wander from this place. Albert Einstein was going on a train to an out-of-town engagement. The conductor stopped by to punch his ticket in the car, and he was involved in work and didn't know what happened to his ticket. So he's looking at his pockets and his briefcase and everything. He can't find it. And after a while of looking at this embarrassed guy trying to find it, the conductor says, "Listen, Dr. Einstein, I know who you are." He was pretty hard to miss. And I know you must have bought a ticket. Don't worry about it. And he goes down the car checking, punching tickets all the way to the other end of the car. He turns around, looks back, and there's Albert Einstein on his hands and knees looking under his seat for his ticket. And he says, "Oh my gosh." So he goes back to the guy and he says, "Listen, Dr. Einstein, it's okay. I know who you are." And Albert Einstein looks up and says, "I too know who I am, young man. What I don't know is where I'm going." That would describe part of my life. I knew something of who I was. I had no idea where I was going, wandering. Or perhaps, like a coin, somebody dropped you. They held you for a while, you're important for a while, and you got dropped. Are you still important anymore to anybody, anywhere, anytime? And the message from this is, you matter to God so much that he traded his son to get you. Or maybe you're more like me, like the son who ran off, and your search just keeps coming up empty. You're just going and going. Douglas Copeland is the postmodern literary icon who coined the term Generation X with his novel by that name. He grew up secular, but in one of his books he discloses a spiritual quest common to many in the secular world, and certainly was common to me back in the day. Here's what he says. "Now, here is my secret. I tell it to you with an openness of heart that I doubt I shall ever achieve again, so I pray that you are in a quiet room as you hear these words. My secret is that I need God, that I am sick and can no longer make it alone. I need God to help me give because I no longer seem to be capable of giving, to help me be kind as I no longer seem capable of kindness, to help me love as I seem beyond being able to love. Joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control." God has a message for you. You matter to me. I'm searching for you. You matter more than the whole universe. It's just a big toy chest to him. But for you, he gave his son. He traded an infinite life with an infinite love to give you not just life, but a whole sense of the meaning of it all. God, we're so grateful to you for this extraordinary gift you give us, for this amazing love with which you love us, that caused you to send your one and only Son to search for us, to live, to die for us, to rise from the dead, to give us life. We're grateful for it. We're thankful for what you have already done. And now if you've been thinking about this for a while, but you never really made the claim, maybe today is a good day to call off the war and accept the search. Here's how it works again. As many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God. It was a right we don't possess just because we're born. We are given it, the option of being adopted. So ask him. Say, "Jesus, I want you to make me into your child. I want you to come into my life. I receive you as my Savior." Secondly, he promised to forgive if you asked. If we ask him, he is faithful and just to forgive us and cleanse us. Trust him to forgive you for the life you've lived and the person you've become. And then third, ask him to lead you. To become his follower is to accept his leadership in your life. So here's how the prayer works. Jesus, I just need you. I want you to come into my life. Forgive me for all the sins of my life, all the things I've done. And I trust you to lead me today and tomorrow and for the rest of the days of my life. And now if you've already made that claim, and yet you have fallen down on this great commission that he gave us, to seek and to save the lost, perhaps it's time for you to simply say, "I'm so sorry that once I was found, I gave up the search for those who are lost. And I want to re-engage the search now. Help me, give me the wisdom, discernment to know who, when, and how. And I pledge that I will follow you in this, the greatest commission of all." In the name of Jesus, everybody agreed and said out loud, Amen.
Thanks for joining us today. Just a couple more things before you head out the door. As you leave, there'll be ushers at the door with a basket where you can place your connection card.
If you're a member or regular attender, then you know that this other insert is our offering envelope.
Which you can put in the basket, or drop it in the mail, or you can give online at any time at riverwood.net.
Or go directly to the city for a one-time gift, or to automate your giving.
I would like to remind you that here at Riverwood, we like to give generously.
It's one of the ways in which we worship Him.
And all of the great things going on here are made possible through your faithful giving.
But if it's your first time with us today, this gathering is our gift to you.
Also, if it's your first time with us today, we have a special gift for you in exchange for your completed connection card.
At the Connect kiosk in the lobby in front of the glass doors, it's the Book Unshakable, which is all about how you can stand strong when things go wrong.
I want to remind you to come back next Sunday.
You won't want to miss it.
Now, for those of you that have children at the other end of the building, would you promptly pick them up so the children's workers can clean and reset the room?
Well, it's been a great day here at Riverwood,
Would you stand and say hello to 3 more people that you have not yet met?
and we'll see you next